Oh, there we are. Jim snuck on us there. Jim just, you see what Jim did to us?
Yes, it always sneaks up on
He
us like
always
that.
sneaks up on you like that.
Catches you here with your face sticking out.
Yeah, I know. And then no warning. Just boom, you look up and there you are, half naked. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning, Sunday Fellowship. We are off to an exciting start this morning. I've got my dear brother Curtis. We were in Chicago last weekend. Say hello to our brother Pete, who really, as we put in the email last night, really, the Father really ministered to us through that brother and helped us put together, or didn't help us, but helped put together the meeting we had last weekend. I've heard some great comments on Jenny's words she shared with us last week, her journey in becoming the son. Rhonda has already given us a good high mark, 2 thumbs up for Jenny and 1 thumb for Curtis, and I didn't get any thumbs up. But anyway, I went and listened to all the messages again that we had in Chicago. I didn't listen to mine. I listened to Curtis and Jenny's. It was really good. And Pete, want to thank you, brother, for being obedient to the Father and getting that there and inviting us to be a part of what it is the Father is doing there in Chicago. We're looking to go to, as the Father would lead, we're looking to go to the UK and South Africa with Brian and his family, and Monica and Lopez and their family and whoever else wants to join us. I'm looking forward to these things. Because I know the body of Christ is 2 or 3. Where 2 or 3 gather, we constitute the body of Christ. That's the church. And the Christ that we constitute with 2 and 3 is the same power with 200 or 2,000. And there's preachers I know that don't want to meet unless they got a whole bunch of people. They just, the Father broke me in that when it first got started. He said, growth in this body will never be in how many you have. Growth in this body will be the believers that are in the body learning who they are in Christ. That's stuck. I can sit with one person for hours and never worry about the rest of them showing up. Ask Jim. There's been Sundays when just Jim and I here. There's been Sundays when just Jim and I and Sylvia were here. Sometimes Catherine and I were the only 2. Hey, I don't have that issue, guys, with numbers. I don't have that issue. That's not an issue with me. If the Father gives me something to say, I say it because that's what he said. If it's for one person, it's fine. If nobody else is sitting here, it's fine. As Curtis told me once, if they catch it on YouTube, you can't go by what you see in the flesh. You just can't. Well, that's not true. You can, but it's not always beneficial. A lot of times there's no life in that. Matter of fact, there's no life in it any time. What do you say, brother?
So you're going to have to change this message if you want to talk to 2,000 people.
Yeah, I guess. At one time.
Yes.
I've had a time where I've had a auditorium. I've been in an auditorium sharing it. But in Ghana, yes. I was in a revival, and we had it right at 2,000 people that night. I've had one where I had 2,000 people, 1,500 people. So, but I'm not moved by all of that. Some people are moved by that. I don't have an issue with that. I'm past that time in my maturity as a son, or as the son. Father said, I'm sending you one. That's fine. I'm drawing one. Jesus said, no man can come to me unless the Father send them or draw them. I go. We go. We go based on obedience. And obedience doesn't necessarily look like what we think it looks like in the flesh. Had a meeting I was supposed to speak at last year, time before, and there wasn't supposed to be a lot of people there. And when they found out a lot of people were going to show up, they cut my time. I was excited at first. Man, I could handle that. And found out that people going to show up and said, well, we got to rearrange that. You can't speak that much because we have people showing up. Okay, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. I don't struggle over that kind of stuff. Anyway, we are here this morning with my dear brother Curtis. He has some thoughts and ideas. Let's see if they come from the spirit or from the flesh.
Want to vote on that?
No, this is not an election. But anyway, we're going to talk this morning about the power of the sense. How many senses do we have? 5 senses. Can you guys name those 5 senses? Anybody name those 5 senses? We got the sense of seeing, hearing, touching or feeling, depends on how you use it, tasting and smelling. Take your shoes off and your sense of smell will definitely go up.
Get on an airplane, it'll go up.
I'm glad you guys couldn't hear Jenny. I mean, she just slapped me upside the head here, right in the middle of the broadcast. Talked about my feet stinking is what she said. And we took this sister, she was so spiritual last week, and now she's back. Well, we're going to talk about the sense of hearing. And what is the purpose? Why did the Father make the sense of hearing one of the most important senses? As a matter of fact, the sense of hearing can do more than the other 4 senses. There's things that the sense of hearing can do than the other 4 senses. Did you know that?
I would suspect that. I did not know that.
No. The sense of hearing is important in survival. The sense of hearing is associated, right now the sense of hearing is associated with dementia. The sense of hearing can do something that the other senses cannot. It is the only sense that cannot. Do you know the sense of hearing is the last thing that goes before a person dies? When you're unconscious, the sense of hearing is still in effect. Even though seeing, smelling, touching, and tasting is not working, hearing is. So it's important. Why? It has a power that none of the other senses have. Matter of fact, we all are so used to seeing things. But do you know the sense of sight is only 180 degrees? 190 degrees, right? 190. Do you know the sense of hearing is 360 degrees? You don't have eyes behind your head, but you can hear. So that tells us a sense of hearing is 360 degrees. You can hear all the way around you, unless you got something wrong with your ears. Get the wax out of your ears, and you can hear 360 degrees. With wax in your ears, you might only hear 270. So we're going to look at this morning. I should have stopped my, oops, yeah, we go. We're going to look at this morning. Curtis has some idea. He talked to me about some things. As we traveled last weekend, and he said something in his message about hearing is more important than seeing. You remember that?
I do, very clearly.
Hearing is more important than seeing. And that, just that word, I heard everything he said, but that word, the Spirit plucked out for me. And I thought about that. Hearing is more important than seeing. I hadn't thought about it that way. I hadn't thought about hearing other than the things I've learned. I was unconscious once. I've never been unconscious but one time in my life, and the Father used that to teach me something about hearing that I didn't know. I was in a car wreck many years ago. We were parked on the side of the interstate, and it was at early morning hours, wee morning hours. I got tired. You truck driver, you know how it gets tired when the road starts moving and you can't keep up with it with the vehicle. And I was starting to weave across the line, so I pulled on the side of the road, and I stopped it was an interstate, so I stopped on the shoulder, and I left my seatbelt on. I turned around in the seat, and I was laying across the seat with my head against the driver's side door and window, and a semi passed. Early in the morning, those semi drivers, they move, man. They move. They really do. I was in Chicago once early in the morning like that. No semi drivers wasn't taking any prisoners. So I'm laying on the seat, and the semi truck passed, and it shook the car. So that got my attention because I was too close to the road. So I turned back, cranked the car up, and moved it half of the wheels on the shoulder, half of the wheels off in the little culvert there on the side of the road. Just before that, I pulled over, I had a vision. And the vision was this. There was a pickup truck in front of me as I was driving, and it had these chain link fence posts. You know, the posts are the steel posts that go in the ground that the fence fits on. And this guy passed me, and he was just moving. And I saw in a vision that one of those posts, those steel posts, bounced off his truck, went under the car I was driving, and it hit the gas tank, and the gas tank exploded. Now, this guy went on off in the wilderness, and I drove for about another hour. That's when I got tired and pulled over. So I'm on the side of the road. I'm half on the shoulder and half in the culvert. And I turned back around, laid up against the seat, put my head against the window, and I was going to sleep. And the Spirit said to me, you need to take your seatbelt off. Because if you're hit from behind and this car explodes, they won't be able to get you out. So I reached over and popped the seatbelt. Took it off. The next thing I know, my wife at the time was in the back seat. She was sleeping in the back seat because she was riding back there, and I was in the front. The next thing I know, I heard. Now, I was not. What happened was when it was a pickup truck, the guy fell asleep at the wheel, and he hit us from behind. When he hit us from behind, because I had a full tank of gas, it exploded, and the gasoline flowed over into the back seat of the car. So I'm laying on, she crawled out over me, and I heard, Dave, you got to get up. And she was grabbing my shirt. Now, she was saying that. One of the things I learned in that experience is that I could hear her saying, Dave, you got to get up. You got to wake up. But she wasn't talking to me, me who I was in the person I was listening. It wasn't me. It wasn't Dave. It was I wasn't. That wasn't who she was talking to. But I could hear her saying those words, and I could feel this body I was in dropping up and down. 130-pound woman is not going to move a 200-pound man, not reaching in. So I could hear her saying, somebody help me. So from what I was told, she ran up to the road with a bunch of trucks that stopped, drivers and cars watching the fire. And two truck drivers came down with her and to help her get me out of the car. Well, these guys looked into the car and saw me as a black male laying in the car and said, you need to get out of here. He's going to die. So they walked away. And I could hear her saying, come back and help me. Come back, please, somebody help me. So the guy that hit us, who had a broken arm and a broken leg, came over to the car, and he and she tried to get me out. This one I heard. This is the words I heard. Raise up. I raised up, or the body I was in raised up. Get on your knees facing the drivers. Get on your knees facing the driver. So because when I was raised up, I was facing the passenger side. I got on my knees. They grabbed me by the back of my shirt, and both of them pulled me out of the window. We went 10 feet from the car. The car exploded. Even the seat I was on went up in flames. The seat I was on did not burn until I got out of the car. Well, that's good news. I like that idea. That means nobody can determine when I die except my Father. Can't determine when you die except your Father. So I'm laying there on the side of the grass there, and I said, what happened? Now, think about this. I asked her what happened. I was dazed and confused. I was back conscious. But that told me everything that was being said I could hear, even though I was unconscious. So hearing is important. The Father created one of our five senses to do something that the others cannot do. When you're unconscious, you can't see. When you're unconscious, you can't smell, you can't taste. But guess what? You can hear. Now, why is that necessary? Why is that important? Why is it important? You know why it's important? Come on, brother, you know why it's important.
Go ahead. I have some comments on it, but go ahead.
Well, comment on it. Let me hear you comment on it.
I believe that I've come to learn this.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you stepped out of that belief thing.
I know. That hearing and revelation go hand in hand. That's It's basically a do loop. You can't hear without revelation. You can't have revelation without hearing. And yet, if one of those two aspects are missing, you will not understand the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe that the Father's revealing, but you cannot hear,
Mm-hmm.
you won't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
If you can hear, but you do not believe that he's revealing,
Mm-hmm.
you will not understand it. So hearing and revelation, and there's two things that I really hit home when I try to teach.
Mm-hmm.
The first is the mystery
Mm-hmm.
and the two-person gospel as we've been taught. The second is revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Not,
ever,
not the book of Revelation,
no,
right?
no,
Okay.
not the book. But if you ever go back and you listen to the 9 or 10 times that I've taught, you will hear over and over and over again that our union and oneness and revelation. You can't have you will never understand union and oneness without revelation. You will never have revelation if you do it from a three-dimensional perspective.
Mm-hmm. Which
It
is
has
hearing,
to be
hearing in the flesh.
hearing. There's a passage in Psalms. And have Jim pull it up real quick.
Well, you gave it to him already?
I did. It is right at the top. That's what I was doing. I was over there.
Okay.
Deep calleth unto deep.
Right.
And that is what, if you look at that Psalm, verse 1 through 6, David is just in despair.
Mm-hmm.
He's in despair and he's crying out to the Lord. And in verse 7 he says, deep calleth unto deep,
Mm-hmm.
and that is hearing.
Mm-hmm.
When I asked the Father this morning, what exactly is hearing? Because it's not hearing with our ears.
Correct.
It is a spiritual fourth dimensional hearing. When he said this again to me, it is when deep, my deep, calls to your deep.
Mm-hmm.
It is beyond the surface,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a depth of the Father speaking to the depth in us, which we have in the mind of Christ. We are now able to understand the mystery.
Okay.
And that is deep calling into deep is as close as I can get to explaining what hearing is. Because it's not with our ears.
At least the ears that we have
Right.
in the box.
Not the third dimensional ears.
But does the third dimensional ears or hearing have a place in the fourth dimensional hearing?
Well, only in the sense I believe that the Father uses it as explaining. Jesus said in John 10, my sheep will hear my voice.
That's correct.
It says right there, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me.
Right.
So Jesus is saying right there, and
took one of
over
my
and
verses.
over and over, we go to John 3. There's another verse I gave to him.
Okay, you got another one too?
The wind bloweth where it
took one
listeth.
of mine already.
The wind bloweth where it
Listeth.
listeth, and thou hearest the sound of. Nothing in the spirit out is in within the third dimension. In this, he's using hearing as a third dimensional example, I believe, because we understand hearing.
Mm-hmm.
But I have come to learn that hearing is not audible when the Father speaks to us. That we may think it is. There's times I know you have and I have responded and looked around when we've heard something,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not an individual, but we have not heard. I do not suspect we've heard that with our ears. We have heard it in our spirit, and it is so clear and audible to our spirit that we believe we've heard it with our ears. So when Jesus said, my sheep heareth my voice,
Mm-hmm.
at the time Israel may have physically been hearing,
Mm-hmm.
but the sheep after the cross, in his absence in the flesh, are now hearing it in a spiritual, fourth dimensional way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the only example he can give that can explain the revelation that would come as the mystery.
Okay.
That's what I got to say about that.
That's quite a bit. We can just probably close with that.
We're done. I'm ready. Close it down, Jim.
We were going to come into that at the end, but that's okay. It can come up front. It doesn't really matter. That's good. I asked the question.
You asked me. Well, I thought
you're
about
right. You're right, brother. I did ask.
I told you I wanted to wait. And you said, no, I want to hear
And
it.
he backed up the dump truck. Beep, 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 beep. Okay.
I told you I wanted to wait, and you wouldn't let me.
My question was, why did the Father make the sense of hearing so important, so powerful? The word power, the title is power in the sense of hearing. Why does it have so much power? Because hearing, and I'm talking first about physical hearing, the hearing we get through the ears. Now, listen. For every sense we have in the flesh, we have a same thing in the spirit. It has a contrast in the spirit. You hear with your ears, but you also hear in the spirit. You see with your eyes, but you also see in the spirit. Now, Kurtis dovetailed into that by saying it comes by revelation. Each one of the spiritual responses is by revelation. Each response to the physical senses, we have 5 physical senses. We have 5 spiritual senses. Paul said your senses in Hebrews chapter 6. He said Hebrews chapter 5. He said your senses have been dulled. What is he talking about? He's talking about physical senses that people could hear, they could see. He wasn't talking about physical senses. He was talking about spiritual senses. Your senses have been dulled. So he was talking about the spiritual senses of a person. But my question was, why is the hearing, the one you got right now here on the side of your ear, why is that so important? Because, one, hearing is the last thing to go. Why? Because it is the last thing last opportunity a human being has to hear the gospel. To hear the gospel. To hear the mystery. God wants to. A person can be in a coma, and you can talk to them, and they can hear. Now, what's going on inside of them, you don't know, because when you're unconscious or in a coma, you're in a place, wherever that place is, and you know you're there, but you still have hearing, sound, S-O-U-N-D. Sound from the outer world is converted to that place, so that person can hear, wherever that is. So my question was, why is hearing the last thing to go? Because without hearing, Paul said in Romans chapter 10, how can they hear without a preacher? How can they hear? I got that verse up. I won't ask Jim to pull it up. We'll get to that in a second. Anyway, so yes, for every physical sense we have, there is a spiritual sense. You follow? So, for instance, most of you have heard the gospel. Most of you have heard the in Christ position, right? When that is spoken to you, without the Holy Spirit's work of revelation to you hearing it in the Spirit, it's just words that are spoken that act upon your intellect, and your knowledge, your sense knowledge, or what some would call sense knowledge, and it has an effect on you. It goes into your mind, and it can become knowledge, even if you receive it. It's knowledge. That means you've heard it. It went into your mind. It could be there, as we talked about before. It goes into your suitcase, and you tuck it away, and it's something you know. But that doesn't make it spiritual yet. It is spiritual, but it doesn't make it spiritual to you. What makes it spiritual to you is the Holy Spirit work of what Kurtis was saying, revelation. And that revelation, listen, the word mystery means outside of sense knowledge. Outside your senses. Mystery is not something that's hiding. It is hidden, but it's outside the 5 senses. So for it to penetrate, for instance, there is something that God has given us outside of our 5 senses. You probably heard this. God gave you 5 senses, you ought to use it. Have you ever heard that? You've heard that. Have you heard that, Jenny? Yeah. I got some news for you. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither has entered the heart of man the things that God prepared for them that love him. But he has revealed these things unto us. How? By his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yea, what? What? Deep calleth unto?
Deep.
The Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God. So that tells us our five senses are important for us to move into the senses that he's given us in the Spirit. Now listen to me. You don't have to be a born-again believer to receive revelation. You don't have to be a born-again believer to hear the Spirit of God. Because you get saved not because you hear it with your ears, although you do need to hear it, but you hear it spiritually. When the Spirit says, you're lost. Or the Spirit says to you, you have no life. Or the Spirit just says to you, you're dead. You don't know that with the five senses you have in your flesh. So it's paramount that there's senses in our spirit, in human spirit. I'm not talking about the Spirit of God. I'm talking about the human spirit. We have the ability in the human spirit to receive things that God has to give us by revelation of that mystery. In other words, the mystery the mystery is that we have the ability to receive things spiritually. Did you guys get that? The mystery is that we have the ability to receive things spiritually. There's human beings. He is one of them. He's one of them. Women are more spiritually sensitive than most men. Most deceived, but women are usually more spiritual. Why would anytime you have a move of God, you have more women show up than men? You ever notice that? They are. They're more spiritually sensitive.
That means they're smarter too. If more show up.
Well, maybe they're moved. Maybe they're moved. Jenny, settle down. Maybe they move by the Spirit more so than most men. Maybe they move more. Kurtis is one that, and to me, that I've seen, Kurtis is spiritually sensitive. That they give him an edge over somebody else, not necessarily, but he has learned to receive more about the Spirit. So he has the access point is more open, more sensitive, more vulnerable. Right. Sensitivity and vulnerability is co-equal. When you become sensitive, you automatically become vulnerable. When you're sensitive, you become vulnerable. What do I mean? Sylvia is sensitive to a lot of things. She has a lot of what we call allergies. But because of her sensitivity, she becomes vulnerable to the things that activate those allergies. So when we're spiritually sensitive, we become what? Vulnerable to other things that come against our sensitivity.
Specifically emotions.
Yes. You want to go ahead on?
Well,
I'm saying go ahead on. Maybe I'll reject it.
No, you're right. When you become spiritually sensitive, you have got to begin to try to understand what's emotion as opposed to what is real.
Right.
And that is, I probably am more spiritually sensitive than a lot of people, but I tend to also be more emotional. Not emotional like crying or this or that. Well, I don't know about that. But
Jesus wept is good for
I know.
Jesus. Good
I know. I'm
going
to say, Father's had to tell me a number of times, you can stop the crying.
Yeah. Been there, done that.
But it is easy to confuse emotion with spiritual sensitivity.
Correct.
And I say that because the longer you walk in hearing and hearing Jesus' voice, or the voice, as he said, they know my voice, they hear my voice. The longer you listen and hear, the easier it is to discern between what is your emotion and what the Father is saying. But that comes from experience. That is not something that can be taught.
Well, let me add something to that. He's correct. There's something that can't be taught by another human being, but that is something that is taught by the Spirit. Correct. That's why we are told to rightly divide between what I feel and what the Spirit is saying. What my thinking is in my flesh or in my mind, the mind of the flesh, versus what is happening within me, within the mind of the Spirit.
Let me give you an example. Well, I can go out to an area in my yard, a kind of a garden area, and I will sit there, and I won't leave until the Spirit begins to speak to me. That could be an hour, it could be 15 minutes, but I will sit there in silence and just sit there. And when the Father speaks to me and gives me something, I at that point have to say, is this the Spirit speaking to me, or is this just my mind wandering, or am I just emotionally hearing something?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually go into a place where I expect to hear from the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I go expecting. In fact, that's why I'm there. I'm not there to get away. I'm not there to think. I'm there to hear from the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually go to a place to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't leave until I hear.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an hour, 2 hours, but I'm there to hear. And I won't say anything. I don't talk. Everybody says, let's get together and have a prayer meeting, for example, about 2 months ago, for the revival for a revival in Dallas. He said, we go and we quote scriptures to God about revival. And I wanted to say, don't you ever go and listen to what he might want to be telling you about revival and where revival needs to begin with you and I? But the people will go and they will sit before the Father and just talk and talk and talk. And I will go to the Father and not say a word, but just listen.
Right.
For hours, just sit there and just to listen. And if you don't do that, you will never be spiritually sensitive.
Well,
I mean, you won't hear if you don't listen.
You won't have as much spiritual sensitivity as you could have. What I've come to see is every human being is born with a spiritual sensitivity because we have the Spirit of God, the Spirit that God gave man. That gives us it gives him access to us. The issue is we have a soul mind that is infiltrated by what comes in from the outside, and that's what we've learned, how to listen and hear from the outside. We've learned to listen how to hear preachers and Bible verses and teachers and people, mom and dad talking to us, and grandmother and grandfather, uncles and all. We've learned all of our lives how to hear what people have to say, speaking through our ear that's attached to our boxes. Don't laugh at me. You're laughing at me, bro.
That was good.
We've spent a lifetime, and those things that we've heard, listen to me, when Jesus said, every idle word that's spoken shall not pass away. That means everything you've ever heard has gone into a place that is still relevant. It's still there. Well, where is that? Is that in the mind? Is that in your mind? Is that in your brain? No, because you forget. Alzheimer's people forget. So it's in a place. Where's that place? It moves through the soul mind and attaches itself or is enveloped in something in the spirit. It's kept there. It's kept. Now, it's not kept there to destroy you or anything like that, but it's so Jesus said, every word that I speak and talk to the disciples, every word that I speak to you, I'll bring back to your remembrance. They had 3 years with him. Just think about 3 years, everything, every day, day after day after day after day, him saying all sorts of things, and he said, I'll bring it back to your remembrance. So it wasn't stuck in their brain. It's in a place that has access to the Spirit because words are spiritual. Maybe I didn't say that clear. Words are spiritual. Every word you say comes from the Spirit. Your spirit. Spiritual man. Through a brain and a mind and a voice that brings it forth. Think about it for a second. Think about it. Why do we have feelings? Why do we have emotions? Curtis used that term, emotions. What is emotions for? Why in the heck did God give us emotions? People just all twisted and emotional. Curtis was saying that years ago. I was sitting there crying like a baby. the Father told me to go invite people to come to church, to meet at our fellowship. He said, you go invite them. I went out and invited all these people. Everybody, yeah, brother, I'll be there on Sunday. When you going to meet? And if ever you get a church, just let me know. I'm coming because you got a good word. I invited all them people, man. I'm sitting there that Sunday morning in my 3-piece suit with my nice tie on, all my chairs sitting out, my board sitting up. I had my all markers. I was ready, books all lined up. No one showed up. I was hurt. And I'm sitting there, and I took it by 11:15, 11:20. I knew they wasn't coming. I broke down. Steve, I broke down. I started crying. Boo, boo. Yeah. God told me to invite those people, and they didn't come. Yeah. And then I heard, that's enough. I thought I'd turn around because I thought somebody coming to church. I turned around and looked, nobody there. The Father says, that's enough. I said, but Father, you told me to invite me. He said, yes, I did. You were obedient. Now, I'm speaking verbally out loud. He's speaking to me inwardly in the spirit. He says, you did what I told you to do. And I'm about a year and a half, maybe 2 years into my revelation of Christ, maybe a year and a half, 2 years at the most. And I'm sitting there talking because I see God not as God, I see him as my Father. So I'm sitting down talking to my Father. So when I'm talking to my Father, it's like talking to Catherine or talking to Rhonda or talking to Curtis. I'm speaking. I'm talking. So a lot of times I'll do that. I'll say, well, Father, what do you mean by that? And he'll respond. So I'm sitting there and he's saying to me, you did what I told you to do. I said, well, Father, nobody showed up. He said, I know. They didn't show up because I didn't want them to come. Well, why'd you tell me to invite them? Now, this is a verbal conversation I'm having with somebody nobody can see. The boy is losing his mind. Yes, I am. I've lost the mind of the flesh, and I've gained the mind of who?
Christ.
Who? Thank you. The mind of Christ, if you're not careful, I'll just tell Brian and I just had this conversation. If you're not careful, the mind of Christ in you can be two. You're still hanging around the two-person gospel. The mind of Christ is in you the mind of the Son. So the mind of the Son can hear the voice of the Father. So I'm sitting there talking verbally to my Father, and he's speaking to me, and I hear him. And you can't see him. So he said, you did exactly what I told you to do. I'm crying. I said, well, Father, nobody showed up. He said, I know. He said, you know why? When the Father, I was years ago, when I do that, when I hear it, David, what about this? And I try to answer because I wanted to give God the answer. Yeah, Father. And he said, nope. So I had to come to a place to say, when he asked me those questions, I say, I don't know, but I know you do. So tell me what you want me to know. See, I was at that time when I was in Revelation. I was getting revelation by the bucket of revelation all the time. And I tried to outsmart him. So he said to me, you know why I told you to do that? I said, well, Father, you wanted me to go out and tell them so they could come? He said, no. And then I asked the question, why? He said, because I wanted you to get that out of your system that you're gonna have people come. I'll send and I'll draw. From that moment on, I don't invite you. I invite very few people to fellowship. I invite very few people to go anywhere. I don't. Now, if he says, I want you to tell so-and-so to come in, I say, okay. If they don't show up, I'm fine with that now that I know. So what I'm saying is, there is a part of us, the human spirit that God gave the spirit of man, has the ability to hear from God. Now, that's not salvation, because when David wrote all of that, David didn't have Christ in him. David wasn't birthed by God. He didn't have a spiritual birth. That didn't come till the cross. But he could hear from God. Elijah, he could hear from God. The still small voice, what do you think that is? That wasn't outside of him. That was in him. Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John. There was a voice from heaven. What? Hear ye him.
This is my son.
This is my
beloved son.
This is my beloved son. What? Hear ye him.
Listen to him.
But yeah,
Same thing.
Same thing. Same Greek word. So what I'm getting at here is that we struggle. Most human beings struggle to hear from God. Well, I had one of my children, one of my daughters told me one time, "You've been talking to me about hearing from the Spirit. I don't hear anything." My comment was, "He's speaking. You're not listening."
That's right. Mary and Martha.
You're right.
He was speaking. One was listening, and one was doing.
Right. One was busy in the flesh.
And the other was listening.
There is not a time that the Spirit of God is not speaking. Listen to me carefully. He is always speaking. Well, I don't hear him. Who are you listening to? What makes you think you don't hear him? Because we've learned how to hear with our feelings, emotions, and intellect. We've learned that. So what we need to learn is how to rightly divide who we're listening to. Curtis said he needs to be sure that he's not hearing from his flesh versus hearing from the Spirit.
Right.
That's a process that you can only be taught by the Holy Spirit. You need to be taught that. You need to be taught that. That's why hearing is powerful, because hearing encompasses the mystery, as this brother said. It encompasses the revelation. Remember,
you can't have the mystery without hearing.
No, you can't have.
You can't hear it. You can't see it.
The mystery is there. You can't understand the mystery or hear it without revelation.
That's right.
And revelation tells us what is available when hearing in the flesh cannot. So I had a few verses here I just wanted to touch on with you. Some of these verses is just to show you. Now, most of the verses I've got some new, but most of the verses we're going to use is Old Testament verses. Now, I always say, what do I say about using the Old Testament? You need to what? Qualify it or rightly divide. So what I'm going to use from the Old Testament is God speaking to Israel. But you got to remember something. When God spoke to Israel, they were an outer people, right? They were fleshly people. They weren't born again. And at that time, he could speak to the Gentiles just like he did Israel. But God spoke to Israel through the prophets. His voice was another man. That's why Moses turned that down. You know, Moses turned that down. No, he had the job.
Had to use Aaron.
Right, he used Aaron. Because Moses kept saying, well, I'm unworthy. I can't. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. He said, okay, I'll use your brother. Don't worry about it. You get that?
Good thing he wasn't sitting next to a mule.
Right, did he be a dumbass, huh? Anyway, I want you to look at there's a couple of verses I want to show you here. Jim, let's look at, I highlighted some. This is a New Testament verse. I just want to show you a few things here. Matthew 13:9 and 43, Jesus said, who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Now, in this passage, he's talking about the parable of the seed and the sower. Okay? In verse 43, then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Now, he's talking about, he's talking to Israel. Anytime you read Matthew, 90%, 99%, the vast majority of Matthew is Jesus speaking to who? Do not forget that. Do not forget that. That includes the Sermon on the Mount. So when you listen to the Sermon on the Mount, it's not for the new creation race believer. There's a few passages in Matthew that is what I call universal passages. It's talking about mankind. Let's skip. I want to look at hear ye. That's in Genesis. That's in Genesis 49:2. Gather yourselves together and hear ye sons of Jacob. Now that tells you who's being spoken to, correct? Hearken unto Israel your father. Let's look at, I've got this other, there's certain prophets that really stand out. I want to skip down to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 4. Let's read those. Let's do them together. You read Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 4.
Hear ye the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel.
Now, who's Jeremiah speaking to? House of Jacob and the house of Israel. Remember, the Israel had divided into 10 tribes and 2 tribes, right? But you can take this and you can read it and you can hear the words, but these words were not given to you. So the things that this word has access to, you don't have access to. That's the good thing about hearing. We can overhear a lot of things that are being said, but those things don't have the same power as it is to the people that are spoken to. You follow? Mm-hmm. Look at Jeremiah 10:1. Hear ye the word of which the Lord speaketh unto you. Now, that's your subject, that's your verb, and it indicates identity. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of. Now, what does that got to do with you? What does that got to do with the church? What does that got to do with the 1/5? 4/5 of the Bible deals with who? 1/5 of the Bible deals with who? The new creation, the body. So here we see it. God is telling through the prophet Jeremiah, hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you. So he's made what's being spoken qualified to a specific people. Look at 11 and 2. Hear ye the word of this covenant. Oh, man. Watch out. Curtis, watch out. This covenant. Listen what he says. Hear ye the words of this covenant, and speak unto the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of who? You understand what this verse is saying? Can somebody please tell me what this verse is saying? Can anybody? Show you guys back there, can you hear what this verse is saying? Huh? Say it. I don't think they heard you. Say it out loud, Jenny.
It's a covenant that's not meant for anyone but Israel.
It's a covenant that's not meant for anyone but Israel. So therefore, that tells us something about Jesus' word. When he says, a new covenant I give unto you. Because they had an old covenant. Who was he talking to? Israel. And his disciples who were Jews, who were part of the children of Israel. You've been hearing this from religion. I'm telling you, Steve, I know you heard this. Rhonda, you heard this. I don't know about Brian. He might have heard this. I know Pete heard this because Pete and I had this discussion. Monica, you and Lopez might have heard this. We have a new covenant in Christ. We have a blood covenant. Now remember, the word covenant is what? What does the word covenant mean? It means agreement. It's an agreement. So if you hear an agreement, someone says, you do this, I will do that. And you say amen, you've agreed to what the conditions of the agreement or the covenant is. God has not made an agreement with anybody since the cross. The cross ended the old agreement, and they have a new agreement. But the new agreement that Jesus spoke about is with Israel. For the Gentiles, they had no old agreement. And he didn't get all the people of the earth and say, okay, I'm going to make this agreement with y'all. I'm going to kill my son, and if you would do this, I will do that. There's no agreement. There's no new covenant for the believer. Now, we see that. We hear that. And we've listened to that. And because we've listened to that, we've bought into it. Is that the truth? No, it's not. God's grace dictates that we receive from him because it's free. There is no agreement. If you ask, it's like walking in a Walmart and the owners of Walmart say for 24 hours or for 2 hours, you can walk in, take anything you want off the shelf, and it won't cost you nothing. Is that an agreement? No, it's not an agreement. That's a gift. That's a gift. You either receive that gift or you go hungry for 2 hours. Walk in there and you can take your boat off the shelf. You can take you some cucumbers and some tomatoes, sliced cheese, get some thin cut deli ham. But that's not an agreement with you. It's an offer. It's a gift to you. Okay. Let's look at this next one. Hear the voice. Deuteronomy 4:33. What does that say, Kurt?
4:33. Did ever people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as thou hast heard, and live? Question mark.
What does that mean?
Something very special happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Look at verse 5, verse 25. Read that one.
now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God any more, then we shall die. They were, this reminds me of something that I was experiencing a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, before the weekend in the Word that we spoke in. The Father was revealing things very fast, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him verbally, I cannot contain anymore.
Oh,
I
God.
cannot contain anymore. My mind, I can't. And he said, son, you have the mind of Christ. You can contain it all. But at the moment, I said, I don't want to hear anymore. I don't. I can't contain it. It's too marvelous. It's too vast. It's beyond my ability to contain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the same, but I can see Israel saying, we don't want to hear the voice of God.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, you go. And the Father said to me, you, son, have the mind of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
You can contain it all. This is not old wine in new wineskins.
Mm-hmm.
You have been given a new mind.
Mm-hmm.
You have the mind of the Son,
Mm-hmm.
the mind of Christ, with this identity and oneness issue there.
Mm-hmm.
You have the mind of Christ, the Son. You can contain it.
Mm-hmm. Let me interrupt. The issue and the struggle that he had at that time, now this is my interpretation, okay? There's not Curtis telling me that, is that he was stuck in the mind of Christ. When you know who you are as the Son of God, there is no struggle with what the Father is saying to you. So there was a union issue and there was a oneness issue. He was being moved from union into oneness. That was new for him. That we all will have that. You'll have that. After we had the revelation of Christ years ago, every time I pick my Bible up, I say, Father, I said these words, I want it all. Now, I didn't know what I was talking about. You know what I mean. I want it all. So every time I open my Bible, the pages illuminated for me. I could read and I understood everything. No matter, I could do this and just start reading and see mysteries. I mean, that was on a Monday. Saturday, I was sitting in the bathtub Saturday morning and the Spirit was carrying. I said, that's enough. Please stop. Please stop. I can't handle it anymore. Please stop, Father. He said, well, you asked me, you wanted it all. I said, yes, but my head was hurting. I had so much revelation coming. It not in the sense of headache that you can take a pill for, but it was just so much knowledge I couldn't contain it. And the reason couldn't contain it, I was trying to relate to it and store it in my brain. That's why when you hear me say, I use my Jennyism. Jenny said, I can't wrap my mind around that. That's true. We can't contain it in the brain because it wasn't designed for the brain. It's designed for the mind of the Son through the ears in the Spirit.
Let me transition this to why the Father even has been speaking to me about this issue in the last 3 to 4 weeks. When I taught on the graveyard of religion, the Father took that to I used the same title, but the Father took that to another place. He took that to listening, to hearing the revelation, as opposed to trying to, in third dimension, see the revelation. And if you go back and if you listen to that, you will see me draw a very clear line between hearing in the fourth dimension and third dimensional senses. But it went beyond that. And everything you've read is out of the Old Testament. But faith is union becoming oneness. Faith is third dimension becoming fourth dimension. And I thought, Father, if that is the process of faith, how do we have faith? And he said, faith comes by hearing and hearing the word. So that is the tie between hearing and new creation believers. Yes, they were hearing it in the Old Testament, but if faith come by hearing and hearing the word, if hearing Christ, then faith is something more than what we conjure. It is something more than what we strain to create in our minds. It is literally everything that we have that is in union becoming oneness, which is knowledge and understanding. Everything that we think we see in third dimension becoming fourth dimension. And that is what faith is. It is conformity becoming transformation. It is third dimension becoming fourth dimension. And it is union becoming oneness. And that is the definition of faith in the context of what it accomplishes within us. And that is why he took me to hearing. You can only go from that third dimension to fourth dimension if you hear.
Correct.
And that is what pertains to new creation believers.
Let me add. I don't want to add, but I'm going to extend that. Again, we're not talking about hearing with your ears.
Correct.
Yes, your ears are necessary. And think about this. If you couldn't hear, could you be saved? Yes. So it has nothing to do with the third dimensional box here, the little thing on the side of our heads, or the biological or physiological function of sound. Not physical sound, third dimensional sound. And I like what Curtis said earlier. It's not third dimensional sound that causes us to hear. It's fourth dimensional revelation. Fourth dimensional revelation brings about hearing in the spirit. Who we are in Christ. Let me back up. You've heard me say this, and I haven't said this much in almost 35 years. But I've been saying it in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years more consistently than I have in years going by. I've said it from time to time. I wanted a revelation of Christ. I didn't know what a revelation of Christ was. Now, I was told at that time when I was first hearing this message that the revelation of Christ is God reveals Christ in you. If Christ lives in you, you ought to want to know it. That made sense to me. If Christ was in me, I ought to want to know it. So what I didn't understand at the moment, what I was getting was a knowledge and understanding from what I heard is in union. Christ lives in me. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the foundation. Would you say that?
Yes.
That is the foundation. Christ lives in me.
The birthing is the foundation.
But if that was the end of discussion, then we would never move from that union into oneness, which is true identity. Oneness is true identity. Let me say it again. Oneness is true identity because that's where we live. That's who we are. Not that if you don't know Christ in you, you don't have that, but you don't live that. You still live this schizophrenic idea of, well, Lord, is this you or is this me? Is this you or is this me? I think it's you, but maybe it's not you. Maybe it's just me having these thoughts. We lost original thought. Mankind lost original thought in Genesis chapter 3. You don't have original thought. You're either receiving it from one side or the other. You're either receiving it through your flesh, which Adam did, or you're receiving it from God himself. Who told you you were naked? He was still talking to God. But after that, we lost original thought because someone else has access to our thinking, access to our mind. Satan, the devil, the copycat. He's a copycat. You think he's a copycat?
The illusionist.
I saw the movie. The illusionist. So, when the Father said, David, you are the Son of God, I moved from Christ being in me, as we said back in those days. I didn't understand that to the full extent. What I was saying was Christ in me as me to the Father, or Christ in me as me means I'm Christ. That's what if you say Christ in me as me, the me that I am is Christ. You can't get around that. But he moved me from that idea, that understanding of union, being one with Christ, being in union with Christ, into you are the Son of God, the person that Christ caused me to become to my Father, to God the Father. I became the Son of God in my understanding. I was already that to him, but I didn't know that because I wasn't one. There was still two of me. There's still the two-person gospel going on. Union is the two-person gospel. So my hearing, he spoke to me spiritually. I'm sitting at this table, and he said, David, you are the Son of God. I said verbally, I do that sometimes when he talks, I am a son of God. He said, no, you are the Son of God. I could not bring myself to say anything else but because in union, there's still two of you. You have to defend that. I can't be the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God. You got to defend that because that's all you've known. That's what you've been told. You've received that. You're in union with that. And to break that union could be heresy, could be blasphemy. To break that union is blasphemy. I didn't want to go through the knothole. I'm saying, no, I'm a son. No, I'm a son. He said, David, a father can have more than one son, and each son has a right to say he is the son of that father. Do you understand? Knothole resolved. My next words out of my mouth was, I am the Son of God. From that moment on, I've said and known nothing else. Now, I've done a lot of things in the flesh, but that didn't change me being the Son of God doing it in the flesh. Remember, we have a body of sin, but we don't have to have what? A sinning body. Now, I hadn't got that yet. I knew I was the Son of God, but I still had some body issues. I still had body issues. But I never stopped being the Son, because once that happened, it was a spiritual revelation that fixed me in oneness with my Father. It wasn't a hierarchy. It wasn't me and then Jesus and the Father. See, that's how we think in union. There's a hierarchy, Steve. There's a hierarchy, Pete. There's me, then there's Jesus, then there's the Father. That's union. But he said, David, Jenny, you are the Son of God. When I spoke those words, I am the Son of God, the hearing and the spirit became one with my identity, and me and Jesus and the Father all went away. There's no hierarchy. And from that moment on, my hearing became spiritual. Even when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, I could hear, you realize that's not who you are. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I remember saying that. I didn't say I didn't want to hear it. I just shut up. I just kept doing what I was doing. Maybe he doesn't see me. Does he see me? Does he see me? Is he looking? David, you know that's not who you are. And you can't get away from the hearing. You cannot get away from the hearing. You can get away from the seeing, but you can't get away from the hearing. Why? Because it's who you are. You hear in the Spirit. Whenever you start hearing in the Spirit, it never stops. Ask him. He just said, he just kept coming and coming and coming and coming and couldn't shut it off. The Father he short-circuited his brain so that the Spirit could contain. So the power in the sense of hearing is not just hearing in your flesh at 360 degrees. It's hearing in the Spirit, which is fixed in eternity. You hear with everything you are. You hear from your identity. Now listen to me. You hear from your identity, whether you know your identity or not. How about a young man telling him he's in feminine gender, so he puts on dresses and wears shoes and wears makeup? He's hearing from someone. He's hearing something spiritual. It's not academic. It's not even emotional. He's hearing from somebody. Physiological? No. Hormones. Hormones can affect that, but it's still, even in hormones, even the hormones at its highest state. I tell you what, talk to that girl who got pregnant. Highest state, hormones kick in just before a cycle. Temperature rising. But deep inside of her, she knows. She knows something. She knows something. What does she know? She knows, if I do this, I could get pregnant. Hormones raging. The Spirit says, that's not who you are. Shut it down. But Lord, you don't know what I'm going through right here. I mean, the temperature's rising. This is 451 degrees Fahrenheit. This burned up some stuff. Even though your hormones can be at its max, the Spirit hears above that. Spirit speaks above that. You can have, we have a body of sin, but we don't have to have a sinning body for the believer and the non-believer, because Paul tells us that in Romans chapter 2. If the Gentiles who have not the law do the things that are contained in the law, they have what you have. You follow? That's what you said about, you're talking about a passage. I don't remember which one it was now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to reel it in. But we hear from God, even as unbelievers, because he puts, eternity is put in the hearts of men. There you go. Eternity is put in the heart of man.
We keep coming back to that revelation.
Yes. Yes. That eternity is the spirit of man given to man by God. That the Spirit has one purpose. The only place that God can reside. The only place that he can actually come in and become one with us. When that happens, we become another person. That comes from hearing. Hearing in the Spirit, walking in the Spirit. Anyway, I think we've taken enough time. Curtis, you got anything you want to close with? You got any idea?
No, I think what you just said was the best thing to close with.
Okay. He said the best thing to close with, so I guess we'll do that. Maybe we'll look to have, I've asked our brother Brian to, he's working on some things the Father is showing him. So hopefully within a week or two, he'll be ready to share with us Curtis is getting more stuff. He's about ready to back up the dump truck on us again. Maybe we won't go from the graveyard of religion. We'll go from the resurrection of the new creation race. I don't know. But
right.
anyway, I just want you guys to know, want to thank all of you for supporting us, for praying for us. Those of you who give, all of those things. Jim and Sylvia. Jim is a giver from the uttermost parts of the world. Jim gives us. You just won't imagine how much time this brother gives and puts in the fellowship. I mean, he really does. He gives more than we could ask or think. We couldn't pay for the amount of professionalism and the amount of knowledge and background that this brother has and provided all of us, including those of you watching this. So him and this brother and Rhonda, all of those who, and our dear brothers out there, Pete again gives out of who he is as a son, and Monica and Lopez, thank you guys, and brother Brian, who shared a word with us a few weeks ago, a month or so ago now. Brother, you're getting behind the power curve, okay? You need to step it up. But anyway, thank you guys for what you give. Prayer, thought, intent, support, whatever it is, we want to thank you guys for giving. Here, open your hearts and minds to hear from your Father. When you start hearing from him, it's a process that will continue on as you grow up in the Son. So I want to thank you guys for joining us this week in Sunday Fellowship. We trust the Father to see you next week. Amen.